So would I switch from Unity to Godot? I've been a Unity developer for 6 years or more even. I've also tried Unreal in creating projects, and it seems now that the universe is trying to tell me something. It tries to tell me to try Godot as well. And of course this is actually based on the fact that people got into my channel, especially in a particular video, by searching Godot, but fun fact, that video didn't have anything but one word regarding Godot. If you are interested in that video, it should pop up right now. So as a Unity developer, let's see my first reactions and impressions to the Godot engine. I'm Adrian and welcome to Redefine Gamedev. Let's get started. I'm gonna enumerate a couple of things that I found interesting or different from Godot. If you have feedback, I would love to hear it in the comments down below. The first thing that caught my attention was the fact that Godot has a 2D rendering engine and a 3D rendering engine, separated one for another. Basically in Unity what you have is a 3D engine that actually cuts off an axis and it's made for 2D now. But in Godot you actually have two different rendering engines and with two different workflows capable of 2D and also 3D. So this is one important difference because the tools are much more specialized in their particular field. Another thing that I found interesting regarding Godot is the fact that everything is a scene. What does that mean? Well, in Unity we are familiar with scenes, prefabs and game objects. It's simple, it's clear, it's understandable. But what if I told you the main scene is a scene? Well, it's logical. But then the player prefab, well, that's a scene as well. And also the enemy, that's a scene as well. So it's interesting that you can actually put scenes into the scenes. So technically you can put the main level into the player scene and enemy in the player and also in the scene. It can get a little Inception, have a scene in a scene in a scene, but it's quite flexible in that regard. It offers the same concept but used in different ways. This also comes to a different advantage that you probably don't see at the beginning, is the fact that you can test every scene in isolation. That means that if you have a player, you can test the movement or other functionalities without even creating a test scene like you would in Unity. One thing that I really liked about Godot are the signals. So signals are like events, but in Unity you have C# events, you have Unity events, and you can implement your own, and it's getting a mess and you don't know what exactly is happening and whatever system is used where. In Godot you have signals, which do the same thing. Basically they implement the observer pattern. So that means that an object can signal to another object that the state was changed in some way. So this comes, for example, for collision, or if the object dies, or if the object does a particular action that another one needs to be aware of. So this comes quite in handy and it's built in, and this functionality is really easy to use because they streamlined it in a way that it makes it integrated with the editor. Timers. Are you struggling with implementing weapon cooldown, enemy spawning at intervals, or any other interval related thing? Well, Godot has you covered. They have out-of-the-box timers which do all of this stuff. So in Unity you would manually have to implement this stuff yourself. So that means more work. When I discover timers, I just use them for everything and they just work. For cooldowns, no problem. Enemy spawning, no problem. For game events, no problem. They just work. One thing that was very different from Unity is the fact that each node has only one script. So we are used to having multiple scripts per object. That makes sense, right? You have a movement script, you have animation script, you have a dev script, and so on and so forth. But in Godot you have only one script per file. So how does that work? Well, it's simple because they structured the engine a little differently than Unity. And instead of having a component-based system, they have a hierarchy-based system. So basically if you want a rigid body, you don't attach a rigid body to another object that doesn't have a rigid body. You create an object that has the inherited rigid body from the object type. So that's the main difference from Godot. Of course, you'd need other functionalities such as movement, health, and interacting with other stuff. So for this you can just create child objects that have different script and of course use signals that I mentioned before. So it's quite convenient, but it's a little hard to wrap your head around if you are used to Unity. Regarding the inspector, I think it's a little tricky to use at first. It looks very similar to Unity's inspector, but in fact it does need a little effort to understand because of a lot of stuff that you need to know, and it's a little hard to customize some things, but once you get used to it, then it's no problem. There is so much stuff that I also like to mention, like grid maps, which are tile maps but for 3D space, paths, which are Bezier curves that you can move stuff around. Unity also has something like this for Cinemachine. The paths work for 2D and 3D, and you can put any kind of object onto it, and probably a lot of other things that I haven't discovered yet. So if you have something interesting, please do tell me. I'm curious to see if you have tried this engine, if you have created any projects with it. So will I switch from Unity to Godot? Well, that's a question for another video. If you're interested in that, subscribe to the channel and wait for the update. See you in the next one.